Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. When it comes to war documentaries, it feels sometimes like we've seen it all, especially in the Middle East. We've seen the devastation, the drama, death, moments of incredible sacrifice and heroism and survival through the eyes of soldiers, of civilians, of children. But a new acclaimed documentary manages to offer us a very different point of view, seeing war through the eyes of zoo animals, alongside an inspiring human story of people willing to risk their lives, and in some cases paying with their lives to rescue animals.
Now imagine how animals, how they're feeling inside the epicenter of the attack.
Тварини не розуміли. Вони збентежені.
Every sound was very painful for them.
The documentary Checkpoint Zoo takes us back to the earliest days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, outside the country's second largest city of Kharkiv, where some of the fiercest fighting and greatest destruction took place. On the front lines between the invading Russian army and the Ukrainian forces trying to beat them back was the Feldman Ecopark Zoo, home to nearly 5,000 animals of all species. It had programs targeting special needs children, youth education, animal assistance, mental health therapy, and more. The zoo is the passion project of one of Ukraine's wealthiest men, Oleksandr Feldman, a Jewish Kharkiv businessman with a passion for animals. The film documents the bravery of Feldman, a handful of his workers, and 4 idealistic volunteers as they cope under fire, doing everything in their power to save the animals trapped in the zoo and remove them from harm's way in what looks like a modern-day Noah's Ark.
The first day, the missile attacks were all over Ukraine. But also in Feldman Ecopark, in Kharkiv. Kharkiv is only 30 kilometers from the border of Russia. And Feldman Ecopark is right outside the city.
The film, executive produced by Leonardo DiCaprio, no less, premiered in theaters this summer and is being screened as part of the Jerusalem Jewish Film Festival. My conversation with director Joshua Zeman about bringing his war film to a country still grappling with the costs of war is coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, editor-in-chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Joshua Zeman is an American film director, writer, and producer, known for films and series mostly in the true crime genre. Cropsey, The Killing Season, Murder Mountain, and The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness. Josh Zeman, welcome to the podcast and congratulations on Checkpoint Zoo.
Oh, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Can we start, Josh, by hearing how you came to this project or how it came to you and about overcoming the obstacles to telling a story on film that literally takes place on the front lines of a war that's raging in real time?
Yes. Well, I think like many of us in the States, we were shocked at what happened. The press had characterized the war correctly so as important as anything from World War II. And I had done a previous film about a whale called The Loneliest Whale, and it was about a search for a whale that called out a frequency that no other whale could understand, and it was very interesting the reactions to that film. I had never seen people get so emotional over a story, so I wanted to do another animal film, and I saw a article on the front page of the New York Times about a chimp named Chi Chi. And Chi Chi had escaped from a temporary zoo that she had been staying at in Kharkiv. This was about 30 miles from the border of Russia. Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city. And Chi Chi had been staying there temporarily because the other place that she was staying, a place called Feldman Ecopark, had been bombed horribly, and the whole place was destroyed. And Chi Chi was staying there temporarily. She had escaped, and she was walking through the middle of Freedom Square, this square in the middle of Kharkiv. And it kind of just struck me right there. Here you have this chimpanzee looking for its freedom, while the Ukrainian people are looking for their freedom. But there was also something else. It was a piece of video, and the chimp was walking across, like just by herself, and everybody was stopped and looking at her and smiling. It was in that moment I realized the power that animals have to break us out of whatever situation we're in. You go home and you kind of hug your dog or your cat when you're feeling blue, and these people were being bombed and didn't know whether they were going to live or die from one day to the next. And here was this chimpanzee making them smile. That was really kind of amazing. And so I literally just went on Google. I got the number for Feldman Ecopark. I called them up there in, again, Ukraine. This is about 4 months into the war. And I said, would you guys be interested in a documentary? And they said, we don't speak any English. And I said, I don't speak any Ukraine. So finally, somebody calls me back and he says, yes, we would love you make documentary. Let me show you some footage. Let me send you a piece of footage that went viral. And I was like, oh, okay. And he sent me this one clip of this young volunteer named Timothy. Timothy was doing a selfie as he's driving in a Sprinter van saying, we are evacuating the animals from Feldman Ecopark. And he puts the camera over, and the back of the Sprinter van is filled with kangaroos. And it was just such a cute, lovely, compassionate video. And Vadim said, oh, I have so much more footage. Would you like me to send it? And I said, yes, please. And so literally every night he would send footage that these boys, these volunteers had shot, and I kind of put it together and made a sizzle and went out and got some financing. And from that, I went to Ukraine about a month later. I'm not Ukrainian. I don't speak Ukrainian. And I had never been in a war zone before, but it was a fascinating story. And I was so thrilled to be able to tell it.
Russia has invaded Ukraine by land, air, and sea.
A country of 40 million people under siege as the largest European invasion since the Cold War plays out.
Explosions reported in or very near several major cities.
The ferocious assault on Kharkiv, Ukraine's heavily populated second city, continues.
Josh, I know you are deep into festival season with this film. I'm wondering if it feels any different for you to be bringing the film to Jerusalem, to Israel, where war has been as intense and costly as in Russia and Ukraine. I hesitate to say that because the devastation in Ukraine is really unprecedented, though I suppose the Gazan devastation is pretty competitive with that as well. But I'm wondering if you think maybe the audiences here might be understanding it and relating to it in a different way. Have you thought about that?
Oh, of course. And the owner of the zoo is a guy named Oleksandr Feldman, and he davens every morning. So the Jewish theme was very prevalent throughout the film. He wears a kippah the whole time, and when I was interviewing him, it was very interesting, because Putin was saying, "Oh, we're fighting the Nazis in Ukraine." It was crazy to him. He was just so flummoxed by the whole thing. So it was always a very prevalent theme, and so he had done some work with one of the zoos in Jerusalem. So I've been waiting to bring it to Israel for quite some time.
It's not just the Jerusalem Film Festival. We have that one too, but this is the Jerusalem Jewish Film Festival. And I also I looked at the yarmulke, the kippah that Oleksandr Feldman is wearing. He clearly has great wealth. He lives in a mansion, and yet he's just not a character that one expects from a wealthy Jewish Ukrainian, I guess you could say, oligarch and politician, also the president of the Ukrainian Jewish Committee, which fights anti-Semitism and xenophobia. So he's a very intriguing figure. I suppose you could make a whole documentary just about him. Can you tell us a little bit more about Feldman and your interactions with him, his relationship to the workers and volunteers at the center of the film? I think probably the most entertaining part of the documentary is what happens when the animals are initially evacuated into his estate, and he has an encounter with a wildcat in his bathroom in the middle of the night, and he jokes that he almost lost his manhood. And then I read later that he had been circumcised at the age of 42. So I suppose that was a topic very, very sensitive to him. But I just found him a very intriguing figure.
He is, for all intents and purposes, he is an oligarch, but he kind of goes against the grain. He had all this wealth, and he collected a lot of things. And, I kind of talked to him about, the fact that he put these animals in this zoo that he had created and what that was like. And, it was kind of, I don't know if it's a 100% correct analogy, but I always thought of him like a Schindler-esque character who had amassed this wealth and then had to basically sell everything to care for these animals. And yes, he's complicit in bringing these animals into the zoo, but he had $1 million wine collection and he sold it for $250,000 to pay literally for chicken feed and carrots and celery to bring to these animals. And I was always intrigued at what it was like to kind of spend your life collecting all these things and then have to sell it. He thinks he, of course, sold his wine collection to a Russian oligarch. So he's such an interesting character. Whenever we talked about the animals, he immediately cries. He's a big crier. And he was just such a fascinating character. But he espouses a lot of values from the Torah, I think, which is very interesting, whether it's tzedakah or what have you, but also funny. Because, yes, he had this huge house. And then when they had to evacuate the animals, he said, "Oh, bring the animals to my house." But he didn't have any idea. When you have that many animals in a house, the house is just demolished. And it smelled. Whenever I talked to people, they were like, "Oh my God, the smell inside the house was horrible." We had tortoises in a sauna. Yeah, he had animals everywhere.
The house was actually not that far from the Ecopark, but the Ecopark happened to be, on the front lines, right?
Yeah, it was really interesting. There were many zoos that were bombed in Ukraine, but this zoo had a very unique situation. When the Russians, on the first day of the invasion, came across the border, again, only 30 miles, by like 9 o'clock in the morning, they had all set up their armaments on one side of the zoo, which was just on the outskirts of town, and they were already bombing Kharkiv. They had set up their armaments on the outside of the zoo because their old maps from the 60s and 70s said that the zoo was a summer camp. So they thought it was a nice, clear area. They didn't actually know it was a zoo. And then the Ukrainians, they came out of Kharkiv to defend their city, and they went on the other side of the zoo. And so you had these two opposing front lines shooting all these, mortars and bombs at each other, and whatever didn't make it across the other side of the zoo fell on top of the animals that were in the cages. And it became this literal no man's land that was in some respects ruled by the animals. And these volunteers had to like sneak in, not only under the noses of the Russians on one side, but almost sometimes under the noses of the Ukrainians on the other side, to kind of go in and rescue these animals, pull them out of their cages. And the minute there was like a drone, they would immediately get bombed. So they had only seconds to do it.
And they were just a really tiny handful, right, of the zoo workers who remained. Most of them had fled, so these animals were almost totally abandoned.
Yeah, we're talking thousands of animals, and you only have thousands of animals, and literally you have 5 or 6 people trying to get them out. At first, it was just triage, trying to make sure that they were watered and fed. But as the war went on and the destruction became worse and worse, and the bombs kept falling and falling, they realized that they had to take them out.
We talk about innocent civilian human beings trapped in war, but when you watch those animals, you see literally totally helpless creatures trapped in war. And in a way, it looked like it made the rescuers, I guess, feel more powerful or empowered, even though they were, in fact, also creatures who were caught in a war.
It's interesting that you say that, because that is exactly, and that's very perceptive, because that's exactly how they felt. I talked to them and I was like, weren't you guys scared? I mean, bombs are coming at you. And look, war, by definition, its brutality is created to strip away your humanity. But in rescuing these animals, these kids, these volunteers, not only refound their humanity, but I think found this unbelievable well of courage, to the point that they weren't scared at all. They felt like they were doing God's work in saving these animals, and it became this mission impossible that they were going to win. They almost did win fully, as you'll find out, in watching the film. But even when I went there, I wasn't that scared, because I kind of was infected by the same courage that they had. We felt like we were telling a story that needed to be told, and this wasn't going to be our time, right here and now, telling this story.
Regarding the rescue, people made the Noah's Ark analogy, right? Not once, but many times in the film. So did you ultimately understand what drove them to take these kind of risks for the animals? I don't want to draw too direct a line, but some of the fearlessness, or so driven by the mission that they forgot their fear. We've had now many documentaries about some of the actions taken on October 7th to rescue people. And there's a similar feeling there.
Yeah, I think in this respect, they were rescuing completely innocent creatures. Creatures that literally had no stake. They don't care about borders. They don't care about treaties. They don't care about NATO. They don't care about culture. They only care about survival. And so I think it was the innocence of the creatures that they were rescuing that kind of gave them a little bit of that courage. I think that's really what it was for them. These are all God's creatures, and I think that they felt that they were on that mission.
At nights in Kharkiv, going outside has become a risk.
The world now witnessing the largest country-on-country unprovoked assault since World War II.
We Israelis and Palestinians and so many in the Middle East, we grapple with the issue of dehumanization, mostly of the people on the other side, as part of the price of ongoing war and conflict. So I was looking at these non-humans, at the animals that were somehow bringing out incredibly human sentiment in the impulses of the people who were saving them. And there's just something about animals, I suppose.
That's exactly it. It's the fact that they have no stake in anything, and almost they can't even communicate. So you prescribe even more innocence on them. And I think it just becomes just a straightforward mission of empathy, compassion, and selflessness. You're rescuing an animal another creature that can't even theoretically thank you. And it becomes a higher purpose, you're serving a higher purpose when I think you're doing that.
And you feel really sorry for them because they have no way of understanding what's going on around them, why there are things exploding, why the animal next to them is hit by a shell and killed. They're just frightened and freaked out and can't understand why.
Exactly. I think that part of it, the lack of understanding, just made them that much more courageous and contrite in what they were doing.
Josh, one can't talk about Israel and film festivals without talking about boycotts. Many Israeli films are not welcome at festivals around the world this year. Many filmmakers wouldn't bring their films to a festival in Israel because of what has happened in Gaza in that conflict. Did you hesitate at all about a backlash for bringing yours?
Well, to be honest, I've been experiencing, there was a lot of backlash against Ukraine here in the States. And the film is, even though these people are just rescuing animals, I felt there a certain backlash. So I kind of understood what was going on. The film was already complicated for me in terms of getting distribution. So for me, it was just part and parcel of the whole experience of making a film about something that's been politicized that, at least in Ukraine, shouldn't be politicized. You know, we're also talking about our leaders who don't represent the voice of the populace. And I think that is also another interesting and important issue. I think the film, I've realized, becomes a lot more about sovereignty of these animals. We pull them out of the wild and put them in a zoo. The Ukrainians were searching for their sovereignty. So I think there's a lot of important and interesting parallels.
Josh, really, as I said, a really important and amazing film, and I think it has a lot to say, you know, in general. But I think it definitely is going to hit Israelis who are watching it at the upcoming film festival in a very unique way. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking about it with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Joshua Zeman, and to producer Eli Shimoni and editor Adi Shacham. If you want to continue to listen to the podcast and make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please, if you're so inclined, leave us a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.